Welcome back to another episode of the Overcoming Odds podcast. Today's guest is a good friend of mine and someone who has been involved with the work that we're doing right now. Her name is Nicole Ash. She is a business development manager at Apple One in California. Outside of her professional work, she's an adoptive parent and, as I mentioned before, supportive of our work. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring her onto the show and have her share as much of her experience that she can with us and related to the topic that we've been exploring for the past month or so, and that is belonging and why it is important to us as human beings to belong somewhere. So without further ado, please welcome Nicole Ash.
Hi, Oleg.
How are you? Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm grateful that you asked me to do this.
Absolutely.
Well, good morning, and I will start, I suppose, with my adoption journey.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Terrific. So, um, my adoption journey really began in a parking lot of a hospital when my husband and I were told just moments before by a fertility doctor that we would not be able to have our own children. And I was in the parking lot crying hysterical, and my husband said to me, he just turned around and he said, "We will be parents. Let's our family through adoption." And at that moment, I knew I'd married the right guy, and he was with me. And so that's how it all started. I had always thought potentially that I would have biological children and then also adopt. My father was grew up in an orphanage, and so I always wanted, I suppose, for that to come kind of full circle.
Mm-hmm.
He would talk about how he had hoped that somebody would have fostered him or adopted him from the orphanage, like some of the other children that were there, so that he had a sense of belonging in a family setting. But that didn't happen. So for me, it also had that other, adoption had that other dimension for me. So at first we decided to do the foster adopt program, and after taking several courses and going through that program, we decided it really wasn't a match for us. And so then we turned to international adoption. And we first actually, interestingly enough, Oleg, were signed up with a agency adopting from Russia. And at that time, Russia was opening and closing their doors, so frequently that we had been through already 2 cycles of Russia closing their doors.
What year was this?
Oh my gosh! So that was 2000 and probably 6 when we began, 2006.
Okay.
And so then we decided, we heard about the Ukraine program. And so we decided to go for the Ukraine program. And one of the real reasons we were looking at Russia and Ukraine is that both of our ancestries are Russian. And at that point, so many years ago, that included the Ukraine. So it kind of made sense for us also to look at the Ukraine. And the Ukraine's program was really presented to us as a program where you would be able to meet children and find the best match for you. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like an agency actually picked your child out for you prior to traveling. This, you got to travel to the Ukraine, meet children, and then choose which child would, fit best with you all. Mm-hmm. Although that didn't actually happen, and the information we provided was not so. But so 2 years later, we registered with this agency to adopt from the Ukraine, and 2 years later we got the call to travel. So it was a really long process. And as an adoptive parent, so many of us have experienced that long wait, which causes so much angst and anxiety, and communities were built for me through that. I began to belong to communities of potential adoptive parents who were in that waiting process, that dreaded waiting process.
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward, so 2 years later, we get our call, we travel to the Ukraine. And prior to leaving, I had started a blog so that our friends and family could follow our journey with us. We were in the Ukraine over 4 weeks, and we were presented a few children who we met, and one child who we actually wanted to bring home, and we had, who was, both of these children were severely challenged, and we were up for some of that, but we weren't really up for the children that we were presented, and we were older parents at that point. We're going to be older parents at that point, and we really did not have it in us to put that much energy into a child who was going to need full-time care. Mm-hmm. Maybe years earlier we would have been up for it, but not at that point in our life. And we had consulted with 2 different doctors, one in the Ukraine and one in the U.S. And so this one child we thought we'd bring home, we had sent all of the paperwork to both doctors, and the doctor in the U.S. consulted us and just said, "You are not up for this. We met and we talked for hours and hours and hours. You have told me what your limitations are, and really, I know how desperate you are to become a mom and a dad, but this child is going to need so much care." Mm-hmm. And then your emotions get so tied up in all of it. Like, you want to be a parent so bad. You know how desperate that child needs a family. And you are going to have to walk away from this. I mean, in the big picture of things, it took, a good 48 hours of huge contemplation to say, okay, to this one doctor and to ourselves, that he's right. We weren't really up for this. This isn't what we anticipated. And can we really do it? Probably not do it the best. So we walked away from that, and we were told by our agency to go home. And we thought, go home? Are you crazy? We're not leaving here till we have a kid. We've invested so much in this. And so reluctantly, we returned home without a child, and we were absolutely devastated. For me, somebody who is always on, type A personality, a big doer, never can sit still, was really paralyzed in my bed. I could not move. I was absolutely, it was undescribable, the pain that I was in. And my husband too, and what happened at that point between he and I was that we were so angry. We were so angry. We had exhausted all of our resources, financially, but more so even emotionally. Like, this had been such a long journey. And now we are home without a child. I mean, it was like complete failure on every spectrum. And and in all of that, to say no to a child who needed a home, I think, was the most intense part that the 2 of us had to deal with. And so we were angry, and our anger was so displaced that we were mad at each other. We just were so mad. We could barely look at one another. And we decided to get quickly into therapy, and we were in therapy probably about 6 weeks, and we were just coming to the point where we were in agreement that we would move forward again with some adoption situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had gotten a call from somebody who was an adoption coach, and I had never talked to an adoption coach before. It was a personal referral, and this woman on the phone said to me, "You do not have control over everything, and you need to basically leave it to the universe. But if you believe your child will come to you, your child will come to you." And I thought, that's so much malarkey. Like, who you really? Like, almost like, yeah, sure, whatever. What do you mean I don't have control over everything? Of course I have control over everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know? But no, she was absolutely right. And so 6 weeks, we were home for about 6 weeks, and I got a call from my sister who said, "I am just the messenger, but there is a woman that I know in Minnesota who read your blog, who knows of a 16-year-old girl who's pregnant and considering placing her child." And at that moment, I thought, "Oh, I'm already on my way back to the Ukraine. I know how to do this now properly,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if I'm up for a newborn. Like, I mean, I would love a newborn, but I'm old. I'm a much older parent. Like, there's a lot of younger uh, parents who adoptive parents who would want a younger child, a newborn who.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband kept saying to me, "Oh my gosh, please make this phone call. Come on now, this is like a door is opening for us, and you're gonna close it before you open it." So a couple days later, I made the phone call, and soon after we connected with the birth mom and actually flew her to California. The birth mom, her mother, and this middle person who we had never met before, who had read my blog in Minnesota. And as silly and corny as it sounds, my son's birth mom walks out of the car for the first time when I was meeting her, so pregnant, and it just felt right. Like, I knew instantaneously that the baby she was carrying was going to be my son.
Mm.
That weekend, she signed paperwork, and 8 weeks later, we got the call, and we flew to Minnesota, and we were there for the delivery of our son. Um, and we have an open adoption, and really, it's been the most remarkable experience of my life.
I have so many questions from what you just shared. The first one that comes to mind is, what were some of the challenges that you were presented with when you started this process, as far as adopting an older child versus a newborn?
Well, we knew that there would be some adjustment adopting an older child, and we had taken several classes to learn how to deal with that best and to teach us, about certain things that we should expect. And one was the language barrier. So, um, just like when you came to the
Mm-hmm.
U.S., didn't speak the language, and so, there was a lot to think about. I think that we overcame so many of those challenges just by the research and connecting with people who had done it previously, um, that reassured us that it's doable,
Mm-hmm.
and that the experience could be good.
Mm.
Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning of this the different communities that you've been able to become a part of, and how I'm assuming that has in a way redefined your own sense of what it means to belong on this planet, and maybe even the purpose that you serve on this planet. How has this experience and the obstacles that you had to go through, as far as the process of adoption, and then the things that sounds like just kind of happened and fell into place at the right time, how did that shape you moving forward from that?
Yeah. Well, I have to say that in terms of belonging, it absolutely expanded the community that I now belong to.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so, I always wanted to be a mom. So that was so important to me. And I remember when I was struggling to get pregnant and all the infertility stuff and not being able to get pregnant, and everybody around me, because I was hypersensitive to it all, was pregnant or had multiple children. People who shouldn't be having children were having their fifth child, and I was like, what about me? I so wanted to belong to that mother group, and I think so much so because of my mom, and so when my child was born and I could belong to that mother group, there was so much in that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there was just so much. I mean, having a child for me um, was like pure bliss. I don't even know how to explain it, but just absolute pure bliss. And to be able to experience that with other women who were experiencing it too or had experienced it,
Mm-hmm.
such a great feeling of belonging to that community where we could share about um, things that we related to about being a mother. And so that was so great. In addition to that, there was the adoptive parent group that now we belong to, my husband and I both, which is so good for us. Hearing other people's stories, being able again to relate to them, telling our truths and not being judged for it in these groups
Mm-hmm.
that we go to, being accepted and accepting others. I mean, there's so much in that belonging um, that we all get to experience once we find those groups that we fit in. I have a boy mom group with boys, which I mean is amazing. Amazing, and we all get to talk about our boys and the differences, and there's no judgment, and there's so much help. We help each other so much, which I think is the probably the greatest thing that we get out of it is being able to help one another. So my groups of belonging have expanded so much because of my being an adoptive mom.
Mm-hmm. How much would you say of all of this? I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and she is, I don't know how many months she's pregnant, and we were just talking about how when you're pregnant, based on her experience, it redefines her image, and it makes, she's at a point right now where it makes her question about how people think. And I was asking her the question of, well, does it does it ever get to a point for you where, as you get closer to that date, where you don't even feel comfortable walking into certain places because of the assumptions that people have when it comes to just pregnancy in general? And so, the thing that we were talking about was community, and how community support is so critical at that particular stage of finding people who essentially can say it's okay for you to be who you are. I mean, there's literally nothing you can do to change that. And so we started talking a lot about your own image and finding acceptance within yourself before you can find that true community. How important would you say that is based on your experience before you were able to tap into these different communities that you were a part of? What are some of the things that you kind of had to make sure that you had on your end, so that way you can truly have those authentic connections within the groups that you were becoming part of?
So I think you have to be ready to be transparent. I think you and authentic. But
Mm-hmm.
I think because when you are your true person, your true self,
Mm-hmm.
you have you have a people see it in you, and it's easier for other people to accept you in
Mm.
these when you actually accept yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember a time in your life when that? So essentially, what I'm hearing is almost like accepting that you're not perfect
Hmm.
and that we're all like that, and then from there you get to just live the life that you were given.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when you were talking about this gal that was pregnant, so there, my whole life, I never felt like I did not belong. I mean, I always had strong connections and belonging. I mean, I belonged to a incredible family,
Mm-hmm.
an incredible sisterhood. Um, there was always, I always had great groups that I belonged to, except when I was ready to be a mother and I wasn't. And
Mm.
I know how my self image changed. I didn't want to put myself out there at these parties where everybody was having babies and everybody was talking about being pregnant. And the other thing, strangely enough, that happens a lot when you're married and you've been married a few years, everywhere you go, everybody's parents ask you, so when you're a baby, when are you going to get pregnant? And it's like if they only knew your struggle and they don't. So I'm really, really self-conscious about never asking anybody that question because you don't know what's going on in other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only time in my life that I recall that I felt like I didn't belong
Mm.
to that motherhood community. I didn't belong to being pregnant. I didn't belong to, um, you know, I belonged to the infertility, not being able to, get pregnant group. And in that arena at that time of my life, I had maybe a couple friends, but I wasn't really comfortable talking about it. I wasn't okay with it. I thought, what's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a difficult time in my life. Um, because again, I thought I had control over everything, and why wasn't this happening? Like I'm doing everything right, I've been a great person, why me? But um, yeah, so there has been that time in my life where I did think there were groups that I did not belong to.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the challenges that you experience for those who are maybe very early on in the process or have recently become adopted parents, based on your personal journey? What are the things that you might have gone through or still going through with your child that um, people can or should be more aware of, and how did you get through them?
Well, I would tell people to find a group, to find a community of peers, people who are experiencing the same kinds of things so that they have people to talk to that will support them and encourage them and motivate them and inspire them not to give up. Um, there are many times in the adoption process where it can be so overwhelming. I mean, the paperwork alone
Mm-hmm.
is a full-time job. And you just have to power through it. Like you have to look at the end goal when you're in that process of adopting. You have to know that you will be matched with your child. You will adopt your child. But the process can be so long and so unstable that really a community of people that you can go to talk about this, I think, is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And at once you have your child, again, I have a great community of adopted mothers and parents who get together quite often, who are available any time of the day for any one of us, and that's been a great resource for me. So I would encourage that. I think that that I guess I would say again that I feel like everything happens the way it's supposed to, and even
Mm-hmm.
if you're going through those challenges or difficult times, either with your child or through the adoption process, that there usually is a lesson in it. And
Mm.
we don't really have control of everything. And so we only can do the best we can. And I really fully believe that everything happens exactly the way it's supposed to.
Hmm. That's an amazing mindset that you have. I started to believe in the same thing a couple of years ago, and that is instead of looking at adversities as points that are painful and negative and there's nothing you can get out of it, I think it's important to look at things like that as there's always a lesson, or always an opportunity within every challenge. And it's more so just being able to take a step back and really reflect on that process and figure out, what am I supposed to learn from this?
Absolutely.
Final thought for today's episode, and this is a question I ask all of our guests, and that is, who or what are you grateful for today and why?
Who or what am I grateful for today? Well, I'm grateful for so many things today. I'm grateful that you and I connected, Ole, because this has opened up a whole new community for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been looking for quite a while to belong to something in the adoption foster care world that I was feeling passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Through our connection, I'm finding that, and it's giving me a new sense of purpose and a place of advocacy. And so today, I'm grateful for you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey and your experience with us. Is there any way that people can stay in contact with you, find you? What are some of the best ways to do that?
Absolutely. Feel free to email me at nikkieash23@gmail.com, and that's NIKKIASH23 at gmail.com.